Ron, I just used the last of my savings and my emergency reserves to keep the lights on. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm getting more and more emails like this, you guys. And the sad fact of the matter is that more and more Americans, they're tapping out, and they're tapping out early. We got a long way to go, folks. Inflation and the Fed, they're wiping out low income, middle class, and high income Americans. Families that overspend and over leverage their credit cards, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, store cards. Things are going to get a whole lot worse before they get better. And we're seeing this from people who had a little bit of savings. She had a little bit of reserves. All right. And we're realizing that more and more Americans don't even have that. Now, the sad fact of the matter is that some Americans have waken up to the fact that the Federal Reserve's decisions, their major moves, they're forcing our economy to slow down. They're forcing unemployment. They're forcing layoffs. They're figuratively attacking the lower income first. They're figuratively attacking the middle income, the middle class next. And it's pretty much a hierarchy. They're working their way from the bottom up, and jobs are being eliminated. More and more people are indicating, they're emailing me, letting me know that their gas bills are higher. Their electricity bills are higher. Their property tax statements are higher. Some people have even reached out to me saying, hey, I paid off my house. Ron, I paid off my house, but my property tax bill is so much more expensive than what I had anticipated. And this is what we call house poor. We're going to see more and more of this. Now, there's not as many people with paid off homes, but some people have improperly allocated their funds. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in previous videos where I kind of described the financial state of the economy and how we can maneuver through this high inflation world that we're living in, and through this recessionary period that we're embarking upon. It's kind of like playing Uno. You could play Uno and just throw cards down. You see your favorite color, you put the color down and match it and whatever. Make someone draw 4. But there's always a strategy to every game. And this is a game. And the 1%, they are manipulating this game. And unfortunately, not a lot of Americans realize that they need to be playing this game as well. They need to realize that there are certain ways to utilize their cash. There are certain ways to utilize your credit. And this is why credit is so important. All right. So, for example, do you really want to pay your house off and leave yourself with like 1 week of living expenses? Like, is that really the smartest thing to do? Sometimes it's actually smarter to just make minimum payments and get by on certain things. In fact, depending upon your financial situation, you might even want to just not even make minimum payments. Especially if you lost your job and you're just trying to survive. You got to know the difference between secured credit and unsecured credit and the consequences. And sometimes it's worth potentially taking a hit on some things while making sure that the critical items do get paid. We're seeing more and more people losing their jobs, and we're seeing more and more people relying on credit cards to survive month to month. The problem is that many of these banks are getting scared. Many of these banks are actually taking your credit line and they're evaluating who's high risk and who's low risk. So some of these accounts that are deemed as high risk, we've already seen Wells Fargo shut down bank accounts that were deemed as being high risk. Well, what happens when American families are relying on their credit because they were told that they can survive on their credit cards in an emergency? That's what the credit cards are for, right? Well, many Americans are embarking upon their own personal emergencies. So what happens when Americans have not only used their credit cards to overspend and purchase things that they didn't need, burying themselves further and further into debt, over leveraging themselves. But what happens when you go to rely on this credit card that you thought was there to save you? You thought it was the break glass in case of emergency type of solution for you and your family. And you go to your credit card and you think you've got, I don't know, $5, $6, $7, $10,000 in available credit limit left over. And the bank looks at your account. The bank says, hey, I think that this is a high risk account. Let's go ahead and cut this credit limit back. So the $10,000 credit line that you thought you had gets reduced down to $1. Maybe it gets reduced down to $2,000. So can you really rely on your credit card to save you? And this is the sad reality that more and more Americans are facing. The banks are getting scared. The banks are trying to mitigate risk. The banks are trying to get ahead of the risk. They know what's coming. They know what's coming. The Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve are communicating with the banks behind closed doors. They have a direct line to this guy. They know what's coming down the pipeline, and guarantee it, I'm very confident that they know what decisions that the Fed is likely to be making before the general public knows. And we're already seeing it here, folks. So these banks, they're going to say, hey, we don't want to lose $10,000 because we feel like this high risk account might max out their credit card and not be able to pay it back. Who cares if this family was relying on this credit card to get them through a rough patch? We're going to save our own butts. We're going to reduce this credit line from $10,000 down to $1,000, maybe $2,000. So they're mitigating $8,000 worth of risk. Now, worst case scenario, this family who needs this credit card, if they were to not pay us back, at least we're only going to lose $1,000 or $2,000 versus $10,000. And these are what banks and these financial institutions are looking at. They're looking at who's weak. And then let's not even talk about the fact that more and more landlords are sending out letters to the renters indicating that rent will be going up next month. Well, maybe not next month, in 2 months, maybe 3 months. But heck, depending upon what state you're in, landlords can give less notice. And many of these landlords don't care if you can pay. Evictions, foreclosures are likely in the future. But if a renter can't pay, well, guess what? We get to boot the renter out. They don't care if the renter, is homeless in the interim. And then this landlord can go right out and re-rent or re-lease this property to a renter that is willing to pay $400 more per month, $500 more per month. Guys, folks, inflation and the Fed are wiping out low income, middle class, and high income American families that overspend and over leverage their credit and who are buried in debt. Things are going to get far worse before they get better. Now is the time to take action. Now is the time to get your butt in gear.